What's good, guys? It's your boy Cardiac K, back with another video on the channel. I know last week I didn't upload a longer video like this on the weekend. School, we were getting a lot of homework and stuff for the second week of school. I took a few tests and I was just getting adjusted to, the school year starting a little bit more, adjusting my schedule. Some stuff around the house needed to get done. And so I'm sorry, but that came at the cost of, a video not being up on the channel. I did post a quick video earlier this week on my basically thoughts and reactions on the Spider-Man trailers that came out and all the news that has been surrounding that release coming in December. So if you care about Spider-Man or if you care about the movie trailer, I suggest that you, go and listen to my thoughts on it if you want. And yeah, let's hop straight into the video. Today I wanted to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks. Now I already know that I dropped a quick video in the middle of the finals. I know I've dropped an entire basically dedicated video to Giannis Antetokounmpo after they won the finals, literally the night of or the night after they won the finals. And then I know that surprisingly to some of you, I had Giannis pretty high on my top NBA players list. And so some of you may have had enough of me talking about the Bucks, but I don't care. So today I want to talk about the Milwaukee Bucks' journey from being the face of mediocrity in the 2000s and being a sucker team in the early 2010s into now the reigning NBA champions, going into what we expect to be an amazing year of NBA basketball and how that became to be. Shout out to Legend of Winning, who has made timeline videos similar to this before. The idea is definitely inspired by some of his videos. I know he did one on the Bucks a couple years ago, but this version I think is going to go a little bit deeper into the mishandlings of some situations that the Bucks had and how they kind of failed successfully when it comes to their rebuild and their ascension to the top of the NBA, led by Giannis Antetokounmpo. So without further ado, let's find out how the Milwaukee Bucks failed so successfully. Throughout the entire decade of the 2000s in the NBA, one face of mediocrity, going from winning team to losing team or just staying stagnant at 30-something wins year in and year out, was the consistent horns of the Milwaukee Bucks. And whether they were led by Ray Allen in 2001, they were, quote, led by the aspiring talent in Andrew Bogut, who was the #1 pick in the 2005 NBA draft. Milwaukee Bucks always kind of found themselves falling short of some people's expectations, but for others just being placed in the same mediocre spot in the NBA that they had been for the previous decade. The only year that could possibly be an exception to this could be 2001, when they finished first in their division and made it to the Eastern Conference Finals, in which some believe that they should have rightfully won over the Eastern Conference champions that year in the Philadelphia 76ers, led by Allen Iverson. Now this roster was solid. They had Ray Allen, who was one of the best scorers in the NBA at the time, Sam Cassell, who was a quality role player, Glenn Robinson, and some other role players that were able to help the team get to that point. But after 2001, there's a consistency in mediocrity, or just being inconsistent at times, sometimes dipping all the way down to the mid-20s in wins, with a win average of about 34 wins per season between 2001 and the 2012-13 season. And like I mentioned before, throughout this time, this team is being led by a caveat of different names, whether it be from Ray Allen to Andrew Bogut to Michael Redd, or even Brandon Jennings in the later years of their mediocrity. The Bucks were changing faces of the franchise every 3 to 4 seasons, if that sometimes, and whether it was due to Ray Allen just going to a better situation, or Andrew Bogut dealing with a caveat of injuries and just not living up to the expectations of a #1 pick, or Michael Redd dealing with a caveat of injuries, or Brandon Jennings just not being good, the Bucks often found themselves on the outside looking in of the playoff picture, and also of getting one of the top picks in the NBA year in and year out. But as Milwaukee Bucks fans know, this all comes to a head and comes to a stop in 2011 when you all make a trade for the GOAT Monte Ellis, and you pair him up with another undersized, relatively inefficient guard in Brandon Jennings, and they make the playoffs and claim that they will win in 5 against the reigning champion Miami Heat in the 2013 playoffs. And after that year, it felt as though there was a switch flipped in the Milwaukee Bucks organization, in which they packed up Brandon Jennings to send him to the Detroit Pistons in exchange for Brandon Knight. Now, from what I remember at the time and from what I've read, Brandon Knight was seen as a clear downgrade from Brandon Jennings, despite the fact that Brandon Jennings was a very inefficient player, even for his time. But Brandon Jennings was younger and he showed more promise to fit alongside the rebuild that the Bucks were going into. And before someone asks in the comment section, how do you know they were going into a rebuild? Well, in 2013, with the 15th overall pick in the NBA draft, they selected a man known as Giannis Antetokounmpo, who was clearly a project pick at the time, and everyone that knows his story now knows that in 2013, for the foreseeable future, he was a project pick. Now, the 13-14 season happens and the Bucks do Bucks things. What I mean by that is they're either mediocre or they're ass. This year, they were ass. So in 2014, they ended up getting the number 2 pick and selecting Duke forward and potential all-star and franchise player Jabari Parker. Now, Jabari Parker coming into the NBA was compared to a caveat of people, but the main comparison that I remember distinctively from the 2014 draft was comparison of Carmelo Anthony. You see, coming out of college and even high school to an extent, Jabari was seen as a really hefty small forward or power forward. And so with Carmelo Anthony, having played in New York for a few years, having, packed a few pounds, in the tug, his main comparison, turned out to be Melo, as Melo at the time was a mid-range guy, and he was off to a pretty promising start to his career in the NBA. 12 points and 5.5 rebounds on 49% from the field. And although, yeah, those weren't anything compared to like what Wiggins was putting up to an extent, or even like some other rookies at the time were putting up, it was still promising for a player who was on the same team as a recently acquired Michael Carter-Williams, Chris Middleton, who was starting to come out of his shell that year despite being in the G League, I don't even believe 2 years before. And he was having a relatively good rookie season until he tore his ACL and was ruled out for the remainder of the year, including the would-be playoffs, as that Bucks team would exceed all expectations and not only have one of the top 5 defenses in the league that year, but also make the playoffs at a 500 record. And in the playoffs, as the 6th seed, they were matching up against the expected contender, the Chicago Bulls, with the emerging Jimmy Butler, the recently acquired Pau Gasol, and the recently returned Derrick Rose. Now, although the Bucks finished 500 and they were the 6th seed, this was not a team that, if you looked up and down their roster, was supposed to be a playoff team by any odds. Although the East was weak, there's no way that going into that season you could have told me that a starting roster of Michael Carter-Williams, Chris Middleton, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Ersan Ilyasova, and Zaza Pachulia would have went 500 in the regular season and made the playoffs. And then in the playoffs, I know everyone remembers that infamous Jared Bayless game-winning layup against the Bulls, to which they took the Bulls to 6 games with a team with nobody averaging more than 18 points a game. That was amazing for them to go 500 and then take the Bulls, who were expected to be the closest thing to a contender in the Eastern Conference next to the Cavs, and for some optimistic souls, the Atlanta Hawks. To take them to 6 games was a very wild accomplishment. And even watching those games at the time, it was really baffling to try to find out, like, why is this team in the game right now? Why is this team winning? Because no one was going off that series. Their highest points per game score was a Chris Middleton, who averaged 16 points that series, but shooting 38%, and with Giannis only averaging 12, 7, and 3 on 37% from the field, there's no way that you could have convinced me that that team was taking Jimmy Butler, the most improved player, Pau Gasol, a proven all-star, and Derrick Rose, who in his return year, to 6 games. That was amazing. That was such an overachievement for that team at the time. And considering the fact that at this time in mid-season they traded away Brandon Knight, going forward for this team there was nothing but optimism, as although Michael Carter-Williams had a downgrade from his rookie season, he still played a serviceable role at point guard for that team under the tutelage of Jason Kidd, who was also a taller point guard who couldn't shoot, didn't really score, And so a lot of people were saying that he could be a good mentor to someone like Michael Carter Williams. And then you have Chris Middleton, who, as I mentioned, the leading scorer in the playoffs and the second or third leading scorer in the regular season, was coming off to a promising start of his eventual all-star NBA career. And that doesn't even mention the strides that Giannis was taking in his game throughout this season, showing flashes here and there of stardom and just amazing potential that we can see from a guy that's 6'10" and for a majority of the season was listed as the shooting guard for this team. The 2015 offseason for the Bucks showed a lot of promise as they got out and signed free agent Greg Monroe, who was surprisingly enough highly coveted by a few teams in that offseason, which was the offseason of big spending, but definitely not as much as the following offseason. But little did we know at the time, despite our expectations of this team with the newly acquired Greg Monroe, this team would find a lot of struggles with fitting him into the roster and the current roster construction itself, and would fall completely short of any expectations in the upcoming season, finishing with a record of 33-49, as Jason Kidd began to get questions raised and eyebrows raised at him for his ability to coach a team with so many young pieces and so many unorthodox players that all require development. But beyond any questions about Jason Kidd and even the disappointment of the entire season for the Bucks, you still had surprising and amazing promise from a player in Chris Middleton, who would shoot up to 18 points per game on 44% shooting and almost 40% shooting from three at the age of 24, despite, like I said earlier, being in the G League a few years prior and not being a player that the Bucks expected to play such a big role on their team throughout their rebuild. But who am I kidding? The most promising thing about this season, and the thing that everybody remembers from this 15-16 season, is point guard Giannis. Now, the thing that made point guard Giannis so special was just the idea of fathoming this 6'11", 220-pound behemoth coming down the court, full steam ahead. He can pass a little bit. He was averaging 4 assists. He can get to the hole at will. He's fast. He's agile. He's tall. He can finish non-traffic. I mean, yeah, he was cool. Yeah, it was a great experiment. It was entertaining to see. But at the end of the day, Giannis at this point was only a 17-point per game scorer, and as we can see by the team's record, he wasn't quite the best player on the team yet and wasn't carrying them to such high successes. But at this time, you could see a lot of promise with his game and with the franchise as a whole, despite their disappointing season, especially considering the improvement from Jabari Parker, despite, not playing a majority of the previous season coming into this season. And then even showing some promise with Michael Carter Williams, still averaging his 11.5 on relatively good efficiency. Despite any and all expectations for this team from the previous season being failed to meet, there was still a lot of promise and a lot of upside for the prospects on this team and even for the team's fit as a whole. As Jason Kidd is still developing as a coach, Chris Middleton, Giannis, Jabari, Michael Carter Williams are all still growing together, and you still have young pieces like John Henson on this team. You still have a relative veteran who, if he can get his act together, can be a nice mentor to some people in OJ Mayo. You have a 27-year-old Jared Bayless who isn't looking to go anywhere. You're headed into another season with Greg Monroe, who's a very solid rebounder at the time. Who knows what 2016-17 can hold. In the 2016 draft, the Bucks were able to get Malcolm Brogdon and Thon Maker within the same draft. Thon Maker, who was a hyped up prospect due to his size and apparent scoring ability in high school and in pre-NBA play, and Malcolm Brogdon seen as a potential role player on the team eventually, a steady point guard that, could come off the bench for a few years and play a solid role, I suppose. And with both of these signings, in addition to the growth from the team last year, only God knows what's in store for them for the 2016 through 17 season. Remember what I said a few seconds ago about the 16-17 season having promise? I lied. But you know what I failed to mention? Chris Middleton's injured. He didn't play the first 50 games of the season. He only played 25 games on the entirety of the season. That wasn't until later. Until, when? when Jabari got injured, because Jabari tore his ACL once again in game 51 of the season. And so, for that reason and that reason only, the Bucks once again fell short of expectations, despite Giannis stepping his game up and averaging 20 points for the first time in his career. Malcolm Brogdon, quote, stealing Rookie of the Year from Joel Embiid, having a very good rookie season, and the Bucks finishing just one game over 500, despite having technically 3 players averaging 20 points per game on the season, having the Rookie of the Year, having a capable coach, at least at the time, in Jason Kidd. Only winning one game above 500 is really disappointing for that team, no matter how young they are. Now, in the 2017 playoffs against the Raptors, this Bucks team pushed them to 6 games, and Giannis was amazing in those games, putting himself on display for the entire world to see the ascension of this young superstar in the making. Now, it's been a couple years since the Bucks have been in uprising team contention, and a large part that started that hype for the Bucks was not only the ascension of Giannis and Chris Middleton, but also the signing of Greg Monroe. Greg Monroe was a clear failure on this team. As Giannis started to develop, Chris Middleton was growing into a scoring role, and the team was looking to move forward with Jabari Parker still on the team, at least for the foreseeable future. They ended up packaging Greg Monroe and a pick or two off to Phoenix for the man who didn't want to be there anymore, in Eric Bledsoe, who would now become one of the starting guards on this team, averaging 18 points, shooting 47% from the field, and becoming a serviceable piece for the Bucks as they were starting to move into even higher contention for a playoff spot, or just any semblance of life in the playoffs and development from Giannis on an upper level. Now, what happened to the young guy that was also supposed to be a part of this process, the number 2 pick of the 2014 NBA draft, Jabari Parker? This season, in the very limited playing time he had, only playing 24 minutes a game, he was still averaging 13 points on 48% from the field, getting 5 rebounds, but it wasn't enough to justify his placement on this team. And so, with constant injuries and just constant lack of growth, I guess you could say, and just his place on the team being fulfilled by random role players like a John Henson from time to time, or even Giannis taking his spot as the franchise player and Chris Middleton taking his potential spot as the number 2 guy, with drafting Thon Maker, signing Mirza Teletovic, and going through an entire cycle of Greg Monroe at the 4, Jabari Parker's placement on his team was put into heavy question as he was bouncing in and out of the G League with the Wisconsin Herd all of the 17-18 season. And through it all, at the end of this season, it was clear that he was not a fit for this team, and that his time in Milwaukee was coming to a close. Former number 2 pick, the former potential franchise player, the former person who was compared to the scoring ability of the great Carmelo Anthony, was now relegated to at best a role player on a 44-win team. Now, moving past Jabari, the Bucks would get to the playoffs, and they would play against the Kyrie and Gordon Hayward-less Boston Celtics in the first round and push them all the way to 7. But that fails to mention the fact that with Giannis's ascension, Chris Middleton's growth, the Eric Bledsoe trade, Malcolm Brogdon's second season, this team was expected to beat a Celtics team led by a rookie and potentially a year 2 player, and then Terry Rozier, and they lost in 7 to that team. Not only that, looking at the season in totality, to only win 44 games, that raised some eyebrows about the placement of the Bucks. Yes, Giannis was ascending in year 4, and yes, the Eric Bledsoe trade was cool, and yes, Chris Middleton was getting better, but when is this team going to take the next step? How good is Giannis, and how good will he have to be to get this team where they need to be? The 2018-19 season was amazing for the Milwaukee Bucks, as Giannis had a career high in a lot of stats, in rebounds and points per game, and efficiency and dominance. And if you just watched each and every game, you knew that he was coming with something magical for the Milwaukee crowd night in and night out, winning 60 games on the season, with Chris Middleton being his number 2, Eric Bledsoe being his number 3, and the clutch offseason acquisition in Brook Lopez, as Splash Mountain would now be at the 5 to spread out the floor for a now paint dominant Giannis, would be amazing spacing for this young growing team. We all remember this season. They got through the regular season. Giannis won MVP. They got to the playoffs. Giannis was dominant in the first 2 rounds and then ran into what we like to call the Greek wall. I lied. Not the Greek part on there. I just wanted to specify that it wasn't the wall that some of you may be thinking. Look, I'm an ally. The increased play from Malcolm Brogdon, in addition to the acquisitions of Brook Lopez, like I said, and even Nikola Mirotic, adding to this team, would get this team all the way to the conference finals, in which they would lose to the eventual NBA champions in the Toronto Raptors. Now, this series, a lot of people like to say that, oh, Giannis choked. Oh, he clearly got outperformed by Kawhi Leonard. And although, yeah, he did get outperformed by Kawhi, I do believe, we have to take into account the fact that this Toronto team in this series was specifically designed to attack Giannis's weakness. And for him being on that stage out the first round for the first time in his career and automatically placed on such a pedestal to reach such an opposition that is specifically designed towards you with you having no experience, it's not really all that unexpected that he would, I guess you could say, fold under the pressure. I don't think that Giannis quite underperformed as much as some people would like to say in this playoffs, and that this was just a part of a grander process of giving Giannis the experience that he needed to overcome the glaciers that would be in his way later. We move to the 1920 NBA season, and it's more of the same. The Bucks dominate throughout the entire NBA. Throughout the entire season, going into the bubble, the Bucks are expected to be a championship team, or at least make the finals to contend with whoever would win the eventual Battle of LA that we just knew was happening. But once again, this Giannis expectation to the finals was put short against another team that would incorporate a similar game plan to the Raptors did 1 year prior. But a main difference with this regular season and repeating the same success that they had the previous year, even with Giannis winning MVP going into the playoffs, is that they were missing Malcolm Brogdon, who the Bucks had lost to the Pacers because they didn't want to pay him following his rookie contract. So they packaged him and sent him to the Pacers. So they lost him for nothing instead. But long story short, we all know the story. In 2020, they lose to the Heat in 5 games. Giannis is, known as a playoff choker, as Chris Middleton takes the wheel and leads the team in scoring in that series despite shooting 42% from the field. But I don't think I have to cover what happens in the following season. We all know, I've talked about it, other people have talked about it, and we all watched it on television, hopefully, if you're a real NBA fan. But I want to end this very long video by saying this. The Milwaukee Bucks flopped on a lot of things. The Eric Bledsoe trade was something. I mean, you had to get rid of Greg Monroe. He was a bad signing to begin with. And losing Malcolm Brogdon for absolutely nothing was very tough, as he was a rookie of the year. He was a very solid secondary playmaker, a very good defender, a good three-point shooter, and fit better on your team than Eric Bledsoe or Greg Monroe ever did. He was the point guard that you truly needed after years of trying to find somebody to put next to Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Jabari Parker's constant injuries and Jabari Parker's constant downward spiral to the point to where now he's at best a role player on the Celtics in 2021 as a former number 2 pick and supposed to be franchise player who was once compared to the likes of Carmelo Anthony. It's very sad to see. The Bucks spent years winning a mere 40, 41, 42, 44 games despite having some of the talent that was supposed to be on the up and up. And with Giannis's and Chris Middleton's numbers increasing, they just kept on re-signing OJ Mayo. They just kept on to Jared Bayless, to John Henson. For a while, that it didn't seem as though this team would hit the heights that they would. And especially considering the losses with multiple future All-Stars supposed to be, and Malcolm Brogdon, Jabari Parker, and then the mishandling or the just wrongful moves with Greg Monroe, Michael Carter-Williams, Eric Bledsoe could have easily led this team to be a failed rebuild, to be a failed experiment around 2 projects in Giannis Antetokounmpo and Chris Middleton, just as much as it being a success in 2021, as now they're sitting at the top of the helm of the NBA as champions. I hope that you all know how the Milwaukee Bucks rose from mediocrity to NBA elites, and I hope that you have a greater appreciation for what it takes to rebuild a team in the NBA. I hope that you all like this video. If you did, leave a like. If you want to see more videos like this, or like my anime and TV show analysis videos, subscribe to the channel. If you want to leave your opinions on the video, leave it in the comment section below, and I hope that you all have a blessed day. Peace.